When I found the extra key tucked inside his jacket pocket, I thought it was for a new office space. I didn't know it would unlock the end of my marriage. It was a small silver key, nothing special, but the tag attached to it had a name written in looping blue ink. Clara. That single word made my heart stumble. Clara wasn't anyone I knew. And my husband, Daniel, had never mentioned a Clara. That night, I waited for him to come home, dinner growing cold on the table. I remember the slow tick of the clock, the smell of rosemary chicken fading into something bitter. When he finally walked through the door, his tie loose and his smile distracted, I felt the kind of quiet rage that burns from the inside. Calm on the surface, deadly underneath. He didn't notice. He never did, not anymore. Before the key, our life was something close to perfect, or at least that's what I kept telling myself. We'd built this house together. Not just the mortgage, not just the bricks, but the dream. I remember the first day we moved in. The walls smelled of paint, our laughter echoed in the empty living room, and Daniel lifted me off the floor when we realized we'd finally done it, our own place. Back then I thought that's what marriage meant. Two people working toward the same life, the same future. He was always the more practical one. He handled the finances, the paperwork, the decisions. I trusted him, maybe too much. My job as a teacher didn't bring in much, but I loved it. Daniel used to say, "Don't worry about the money, love. I've got us." And for a long time I believed him. I still remember Sunday mornings, coffee brewing, radio humming, Daniel reading the paper in his robe. He'd look up and say, "We're lucky, you know?" And I'd smile, feeling proud that we'd made something real together. But little by little, things began to shift. He started taking more late meetings, talking less at dinner. He began to close his phone screen whenever I walked by. I noticed the cologne, one I hadn't bought him, lingering on his shirts. But I brushed it off. Marriage gets busy, I told myself. People grow tired, but it doesn't mean they stop loving. I was wrong. It was a Thursday evening when I first felt it in my bones, that something wasn't right. Daniel had said he'd be home by 7, but it was almost 10. I called once, then twice, and he didn't answer. By the time I heard his car pull into the driveway, I was sitting on the couch, pretending to read but really just listening. He came in smelling faintly of wine and something floral, perfume that didn't belong to me. His tie was missing, and his shirt had a faint crease across the chest like someone had gripped it. "Long night?" I asked, keeping my voice casual. He nodded, avoiding my eyes. "Client dinner. Went over time." "Where at?" He hesitated, just a fraction too long. "The usual place downtown." I smiled and said nothing. But later, when he was asleep, I checked his jacket pocket. Habit, really. That's when I found the key. First, I thought maybe it was for storage or his office. But the name on the tag, Clara, kept flashing in my mind like a warning light. Over the next few days, I watched him more closely. He'd step outside to take calls. He'd shower as soon as he came home. Once, he came back smelling of lilac body spray. I began to doubt my own senses. Maybe I was imagining things. Maybe Clara was a client, an assistant, anyone but the woman my heart already feared she was. But doubt has a way of gnawing quietly until it finds the truth. A week later, I decided I couldn't live with the not knowing. He'd gone out to check on a property deal, so I followed him. My hands were trembling on the steering wheel the whole time. I remember how the sun was setting, painting the sky in that cruel golden color that makes everything look almost too beautiful to be real. He drove just a few blocks away, our neighborhood. That's what made it worse. The betrayal wasn't somewhere far away. It was right here, hidden in plain sight. I parked a few houses down and watched as he pulled into the driveway of a newly built townhouse at the end of our street. He got out, looked around, then knocked on the door. She opened it. Clara. I didn't know her, but I'll never forget her face. Young, maybe late 20s, soft-spoken. Wearing one of those silk robes you only wear when you feel safe in someone's presence. She smiled at him, and he smiled back. It wasn't the smile he gave to colleagues or strangers. It was the one I hadn't seen in months, the kind that reached his eyes. He leaned down, kissed her, and stepped inside. I sat there in my car, frozen. My heart didn't shatter all at once. It cracked slowly like glass under pressure, every breath splintering me a little more. All I could think was, he built her a house. The key, the secrecy, the late nights. It all fit. He hadn't just cheated. He'd created a second home for his lies, funded by the same money we used to build ours. I drove home in silence. I didn't cry that night. Not yet. I just sat at our dining table, staring at the empty chair across from me, and whispered to myself, so this is what loyalty looks like. When he came home past midnight, I was still awake. He didn't notice at first. He kicked off his shoes, poured himself a drink, and asked, "Why are you up?" I looked at him, really looked. At the man I'd trusted for 15 years. The man who had built my dream house while planting another one just down the street. "Daniel," I said quietly. "Who's Clara?" He froze. His glass stopped midair. The color drained from his face. And in that instant I didn't need an answer. I already had it. For a long moment Daniel just stared at me. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked toward the jacket where the key used to be, then back to me. "You went through my things," he finally said. That was all. No denial. No confusion. Just that single question, accusation replacing guilt. "I went through my husband's jacket," I said quietly, "and found another woman's name attached to a house key." He sighed, rubbed his temples, and sat down across from me. "You're overreacting, Evelyn." The way he said my name, so calm, almost condescending, made my hands tremble. "Am I?" I asked. "Then why does this Clara have a key, Daniel? Why does she have a house? Right here in our neighborhood?" He blinked, his composure cracking for a second. "You followed me?" I almost laughed. Of course that's what he focused on. "Yes. I followed you," I said. "And I saw you walk into her house. I saw her open the door wearing your robe." His eyes widened, then darkened. "You shouldn't have done that." I stared at him in disbelief. "I shouldn't have done that? You're cheating on me, Daniel." He leaned back, his voice flattening. "It's not what you think. It's exactly what I think." Silence. Just the ticking clock, loud and slow. Then he said the words that cut deeper than any confession could. "She understands me." The air left my body. He went on, as if explaining something logical, reasonable. "I've been under pressure. You're always busy, distracted. Clara listens. She doesn't nag or judge." I felt the sting rise in my eyes. "You mean she doesn't ask questions? She doesn't know the real you?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night I didn't scream or throw things. I didn't beg him to stay. I just stood up, walked to our bedroom, and closed the door. He slept on the couch. Or maybe he didn't sleep at all. I don't know. What I do remember is sitting at the edge of the bed, my wedding ring catching the soft light from the window, and realizing that it meant nothing now. The next morning I woke up before dawn. I made coffee, 2 cups out of habit. I poured his down the sink. Then I sat at the kitchen table and began to make a list. I didn't write about him. I wrote about me. Every bill I didn't have in my name. Every asset tied to his account. Every document he'd kept, because it was easier that way. 15 years of shared life, and I realized how invisible I'd made myself. How dependent I'd become on a man who had quietly erased my footing. So I started digging. At the bank, I found that he'd opened another account months ago. Payments labeled as maintenance were being wired to a woman named Clara Reed. Maintenance. He was supporting her with our money. I took screenshots. I made copies. I kept my composure, even when the clerk looked at me with that sympathetic tilt of the head people reserve for those they pity. When I got home, Daniel was gone. No note. No apology. Just gone. That evening I called a lawyer. A woman named Teresa who came recommended by a friend. She listened quietly as I explained everything. When I told her about the house he'd bought for Clara, she said, "If your name's on the mortgage, half of that money is technically yours." That was the first time I smiled in days. Not because I cared about the money, but because I realized I still had power. 3 days later, Daniel returned home. He looked tired, unshaven, pale, desperate for calm. He tried to act like nothing had changed. "Can we talk?" he asked, standing awkwardly in the doorway. I nodded. "Of course." He sat down across from me again, just like that first night. Only this time there was no fear in me, just clarity. He started with a sigh. "I made a mistake." I said nothing. "She meant nothing," he continued. "It just happened. I didn't plan it." I looked at him, my voice steady. "Daniel, you didn't just cheat. You built her a house. You made it happen brick by brick. His eyes glistened for a moment, but I didn't believe the tears. Please, Evie, don't do this. We can fix it. I took a slow breath. No, Daniel. You broke it. He reached across the table, but I pulled my hand back. I already spoke to a lawyer, I said. We'll be dividing everything, including the townhouse. His head snapped up. What townhouse? The one Clara lives in. The one you paid for with our money. His mouth fell open, speechless. Evelyn. No, I interrupted. You wanted a double life. Now you can pay double for it. He stared at me for a long time, then stood up, muttering something under his breath before walking out again. The door clicked shut behind him, and for the first time the silence felt clean. It didn't take long for the truth to reach others. In our neighborhood, secrets move faster than wind. People saw Clara leaving her house, saw Daniel's car parked there late at night. Word spread. When he came to collect some of his things a week later, our neighbor Mrs. Jenkins stood outside watering her plants. She didn't even hide her glare. Afternoon, Daniel, she said, voice sharp enough to slice. He nodded awkwardly, pretending not to notice the way she turned her back on him before he could answer. I stood by the window watching it all unfold. Not with pride, not with vengeance, but with a strange, quiet sadness. This was the man I'd once built a life with, and now he was the neighborhood scandal. That night Clara called me. Her voice was soft, hesitant. Mrs. Morgan? Clara. I took a deep breath. Yes. I'm sorry, she said, voice trembling. I didn't know he was still with you. He told me you two were separated. I let the silence stretch. I could hear her crying on the other end. Finally, I said, he told me the same thing about you. She sobbed harder. I didn't mean to ruin your life. I closed my eyes. You didn't. He did. Before she could reply, I hung up. That was the moment I decided. I wasn't going to be another woman he destroyed. I began to rebuild, not for revenge but for survival. I sold half of the furniture, packed up what mattered, and moved into a small apartment across town. It wasn't much, but it was mine. I could breathe there. Each night I slept easier knowing I'd taken back control of my life, one document, one key, one heartbeat at a time. The first night in my new apartment I didn't sleep much. The silence was different. Not hollow like before, but alive. It was the kind of silence that waits for you to fill it with something new. I sat on the balcony with a cup of tea, looking out over the dim streetlights, and for the first time in years I didn't feel small. The air was heavy with freedom, and a little fear. Because freedom, I realized, isn't peaceful at first. It's terrifying. It's standing in the middle of your life with both hands empty and asking yourself, what now? Days turned into weeks. My lawyer handled the paperwork. Daniel didn't fight much. I think the shame had already done most of the damage. The court granted me half of everything, including equity from the townhouse. When I sold my share, I didn't even feel guilt. That house had been built on betrayal. I was just reclaiming my piece of the truth. When the final signature was done, Teresa, my lawyer, looked up from the papers and said softly, "You're free now." I nodded, but I didn't celebrate. Freedom, as it turns out, doesn't come with fireworks. It comes quietly, like a soft exhale after a long-held breath. I started working again, consulting for a small design firm downtown. First, I was nervous. 15 years as a homemaker had buried my confidence deep under layers of compromise. But once I got back into it, the rhythm came naturally. My hands remembered what my heart had always known. I was capable. I always had been. The first paycheck I received in my name alone, I didn't spend it. I framed the stub and kept it in my drawer. A reminder. Proof that I could stand without him. One afternoon about a month later, I ran into Clara at a cafe near my new office. She looked different, smaller somehow, like the weight of the truth had finally settled on her shoulders. She noticed me before I could leave. "Evelyn," she said softly. I turned, polite but guarded. "Clara." She hesitated, then asked, "Can I sit?" I nodded slowly. We sat across from each other, the air between us thick with everything unsaid. She fidgeted with her coffee cup. "He left me too," she said after a pause. "A few weeks ago." I just nodded. "He said he needed time to find himself." She gave a bitter little laugh. Whatever that means. I wanted to say something cruel, something that would make her feel the way I had felt when I first saw them together. But when I looked at her trembling hands, the exhaustion in her face, I couldn't. Because now I saw her for what she really was. Not a villain but another victim of the same liar. "I'm sorry," she whispered, tears welling up. "For all of it." I nodded again. "Me too." And that was it. No drama. No shouting. Just two women sitting across from each other, both burned by the same flame. When she left, I felt lighter, like forgiveness wasn't a gift I was giving her, but one I was giving myself. I started taking small steps toward joy again. Little things, buying flowers for myself on Fridays, cooking dinner just the way I liked it, dancing barefoot in my kitchen to old jazz records. I began journaling every night, writing letters to the woman I used to be. "Dear Evelyn," I wrote one evening, "you didn't fail. You just loved someone who didn't know how to love back." It became my ritual, my way of remembering that healing isn't about forgetting the past. It's about no longer needing it to make sense. A few months later, I got a call from Daniel. It was late, close to midnight. I almost didn't answer, but curiosity got the better of me. "Evie," he said softly, his voice carrying that same tired charm I once fell for. "Can we talk?" I sighed. "About what?" I wanted to apologize. For everything. There was a pause. Then he added, "I'm not doing well. I lost Clara. I lost the house. I lost you." I closed my eyes, feeling a strange mixture of pity and detachment. "Daniel," I said gently, "you didn't lose me. You threw me away." He didn't respond right away. I could hear his breathing on the other end, shallow, regretful. "I miss you," he whispered. I looked around my apartment, the plants I'd nurtured, the books stacked neatly, the framed photo of me laughing with friends I'd reconnected with. And I realized I didn't miss him. I missed who I thought he was. So I said, "Goodbye, Daniel." And I hung up. That night, I slept peacefully for the first time in years. The following spring, I took a trip to the coast. I booked a small cottage by the sea, nothing fancy, just quiet. Each morning I'd walk along the shoreline, letting the waves wash over my feet, the salt air brushing against my skin. One morning I brought with me a small silver key, the one I'd found in his jacket months ago. I stood at the edge of the water, looking at it resting in my palm. It used to unlock the door to lies, to betrayal, to heartbreak. Now it was just a piece of metal. I whispered, "You don't get to keep any part of me anymore." Then I threw the key into the sea. It disappeared with a quiet splash, and with it, the last bit of pain I'd been carrying. That evening, I sat by the window of the cottage, watching the sunset paint the ocean in gold and crimson. I thought about how love can build a house, but only self-respect can make it a home. Daniel taught me that. In the cruelest, most necessary way. And as I sipped my tea, I finally smiled, not because everything was perfect, but because I had learned how to be whole again. Sometimes betrayal doesn't break you. It reveals you. It shows you who you are when the illusion is gone, when the walls crumble, when love turns into ash. People ask me if I'd ever trust again. And the truth is yes. But I'll trust differently. Not blindly. Not desperately. Because now I know love is not about handing someone a key and hoping they don't lock you out. It's about being your own safe place first. When I threw that key into the water, I thought it would feel like revenge. But it didn't. It felt like surrender. Like setting down a weight I had carried for far too long. You see, people talk about betrayal like it's a moment, a knife that strikes once. But it isn't. It's a slow bleed. It starts the first time they lie and you forgive too easily. It deepens the moment they stop meeting your eyes. And before you realize it, you're standing in a house you helped build, wondering when it stopped feeling like home. I used to think love meant holding on, staying loyal no matter what storms came. But now I know. Sometimes love means letting go because holding on is what's breaking you. That's the part they never tell you about healing. It doesn't happen when you leave. It happens when you stop waiting for an apology that will never come. After the divorce, I went back to that old neighborhood once. It was purely by accident. A wrong turn, a familiar street name. The house was still there. Same brick walls. Same painted porch. But the windows looked dull, the curtains drawn tight. I parked across the street for a moment and watched as a for sale sign swayed in the wind. And I realized that house wasn't my story anymore. It was just a building, for walls and a roof, no longer filled with promises, laughter, or lies. And I smiled, because the best revenge isn't a fight, or a scene, or even a victory. It's peace. Quiet, steady peace. These days, when I wake up in my little apartment by the sea, I light a candle in the morning. It's not for anyone else. It's for me, a small reminder that warmth can exist without permission, and light can come from within. Some mornings I think about Daniel, not with anger anymore, but with clarity. He was the lesson I needed to learn before I could meet myself. And that's what life does, doesn't it? It breaks you just enough to show you who you were meant to be all along. So if you're listening to this right now, and you've been lied to, left behind, or replaced, I want you to know something. You are not disposable. You are not the house they walked out of. You are the foundation. The one who built, the one who stayed, the one who can rebuild again. And one day, when the dust settles, you'll look back and see that they didn't destroy you. They just revealed the strength you'd been hiding all along. Loyalty is not a word. It's an action. And if they couldn't live by it, then let your leaving be the loudest truth they'll ever hear. Because peace is the sound of your own footsteps walking away from the fire, and never looking back. Sometimes, life doesn't hand you closure. Sometimes you have to build it yourself, brick by brick, moment by moment. And when you do, you realize that losing someone's loyalty is never the end of your story. It's just the beginning of your freedom. Would you have done what I did? Tell me in the comments below. And if this story found you when you needed it most, I hope you'll stay for the next one.